Welcome back, Improvement Nerds. You know the drill. We dive deep into all things improvement, one nerdy nugget at a time. And today, we're rewiring our understanding of change, literally. In this episode, I'm joined by the incredible Chris Hayes, who brings the 1-2 punch of process improvement mastery and brain science brilliance. She's here to walk us through why your team's resistance to change isn't a character flaw, it's neurology, and why even your most logical process won't stick unless it speaks to the brain's emotional language. We're talking addiction recovery, amygdalas, prefrontal cortex shutdowns, dopamine hits, and how all of that translates into better leadership, better coaching, and more sustainable improvement. And oh yeah, there's a model. It's called the brain model, and it's going to change the way you think about, well, everything. So grab your safety goggles, improvement nerds, because today we're diving into brain science as we wage an all-out war on bad processes. Christiana, we're so glad to have you on the Improvement Nerds podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I was looking through some of our past email exchanges and noticed that your signature line looks like a few paragraphs long with multiple certifications and all things process improvement. Your credentials speak for themselves. Your work on the neuroscience of change is really just a powerful lens for those of us working in improvement or leadership and organizational culture. Today, we're going to just dive into your approach, Wired for Excellence, harnessing brain science for organizational success, and how understanding the brain can actually help leaders, teams, and organizations navigate change more effectively. So are you ready to nerd out?
I'm totally ready to nerd out.
Oh,
I
awesome.
nerd out on this stuff.
That is great. I can't wait to learn from you. Let's dive in. Let's start with your personal journey. I find it fascinating that you have this interest in neuroscience, but you also have this wealth of knowledge in process improvement. Like I said, you have a lot of certifications.
It just means I'm old, Mark. That's all that means. I've been around long enough to get all sorts of experiences, and I'm a forever learner.
Yes, I mean, it seems that way. So can you start with telling us about maybe your journey in the world of process improvement or the improvement sciences, and then we'll get into the neuroscience piece of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I've been doing this a while. I think I started my, I would say process improvement side of things. Let's say it would have been like 1989. I was working for a hospital in Detroit. That's where I'm from. And at this hospital, we were implementing what was then the compliance system that kind of connects to ISO 9001. We called it JACO, a Joint Commission. And so it was very compliance related, but the compliance portion of it really had us looking at the processes for how we were treating patients, how we were operationalizing everything from cleaning instruments to scheduling patients and such. So I didn't know what it was back then. I had a doctor that was kind of leading the charges, and I dipped my toes in. And when I dipped my toes in, I fell in completely over my head, and I've been swimming that stream ever since. It's just an amazing way to look at business and everything in your life. So from that point, I think every single position that I've held since then has surrounded something with process improvements or organizational improvements, including being on the board of directors of a couple of different organizations, VP of quality, COO at different organizations. So I just live and breathe this stuff and have for 30 years.
That's awesome. And I'm thankful for the doctor that helped spark your interest in process improvement. What sparked your interest in neuroscience, and how did that lead you into the work that you're doing today?
Well, it wasn't a textbook. It definitely wasn't a seminar that got me into it. It was actually my daughter. About 10 years ago, my oldest daughter, Jessica is her name, she was in addiction recovery. And if you've never been through that, and I hope you have not, or anybody listening has not, but it's really an all hands on deck kind of experience. The whole family goes through it, not just the person in treatment. And oh, by the way, this story does not have a sad ending. Jessica is doing amazing, more than amazing. She is one of the lucky ones. Not everybody is, but I have to throw that out there because I don't want anybody to be sad. Anyway, as I walked through that journey with her, I started learning about how the brain works under stress, which is what's happening during active addiction. So I learned how it responds to perceived threat, like the panic of withdrawal when the brain doesn't get what it's come to expect. I learned what motivates the brain, usually the next hit or relief from discomfort that an active addict will get. And I also learned how it can rewire itself through experiences and repetition and safety. That's what treatment for addicts, good treatment, is really all about, helping the brain create new patterns, not just breaking old ones. So what really struck me was how familiar that all felt. It was, like I said, it's this kind of surreal process that I was going through anyway, but it was connecting. I was already working with organizations, helping leaders implement change and engage their teams and all that good stuff. But something always felt like it was missing. And that something was the brain part. We were approaching change logically. People don't process change logically at all. The brain, as I learned, responds emotionally first. In both cases, addiction recovery or culture change, process change, any kind of change, the key isn't pushing harder. Right? You can't tell an addict, hey, just go get better, go change, quit doing that. I can't do that same thing in an organization. It's really about creating the right conditions for the brain to do what it's built to do. The brain is built to adapt and rewire and grow. That's what opened the door for me. I really realized that if I want change to stick in the organizations that I was working with, that we can't ignore how the brain responds to all of the rewiring.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal story about Jessica and how that maybe has shaped or framed the way you think about leadership, improvement, and organizational excellence. Can you elaborate more about that?
Sure. Going through addiction recovery as a parent really teaches you a lot, I have to say. Not just about resilience and uncertainty, but about what people really need to grow, evolve, and improve. It made me a more grounded leader, I think. I stopped looking at resistance as defiance and really started to seeing it for what it was, which is protection. That shift reframed everything for me, from how I coach leaders to how I design systems. When leaders understand that the brain isn't trying to just be difficult, or the person isn't trying to be difficult, the brain is just trying to stay safe, the leader can stop trying to push people through change and start creating a space for them to engage and be motivated to change themselves. And that shift from pressure to permission, from fear to clarity, that's the thread that runs through really everything I now teach and coach.
That's so interesting. And I think this is super helpful information to recognize that the brain is doing something, and it may not just be resistance to change. Can you start to guide us through the brain's response to change? Like, what's going on neurologically when people experience change in the workplace?
Well, let me start off by saying I am not a scientist, so I'm going to keep this kind of high level. But when people experience change, especially the kind they don't choose, the brain doesn't typically greet it with curiosity. It treats it like it's a threat. And there's the old saying, people don't like change. They really don't. It's the brain. It's not the people. It's the brain. That's because our brains are prediction machines. The brain is constantly scanning for patterns, and the brain is trying to anticipate what's going to come next. That's how the brain works. So when something changes, like a process or a role or even a new system, the brain loses its ability to predict because it doesn't know what's coming next. And that uncertainty flips the what I call the internal uh-oh switch. So the uh-oh switch comes on, and that threat response it's not just psychological, it truly is physiological. So it's physical. Your heart rate increases, your focus narrows, your energy shifts towards more of a self-preservation or protection rather than where we want it, which is innovating and collaborating and all of those good things. So the brain is hard at work there. And this can happen even when the change is technically good or the change makes perfect sense on paper. The brain's first priority is always going to be survival. It's not improvement. Even though we want people to improve, it'll always go for survival first. And until that brain regains a sense of clarity and control, resistance is going to be its default always. It's not difficult people. The data might be solid, but the brain hasn't caught up with the understanding of the evidence that's saying, yes, this change is good. And this is probably the time to say that I'm not a neuroscientist, but again, I just geek out over this stuff. The amygdala, that's the part of the brain's oldest survival system, by the way. We call it the lizard brain and a few other terms in there, but the lizard brain is just, there's not a lot going on except survival. That amygdala is going to hit the panic button the minute that it sees any type of risk. What it does is it scans the environment for anything that's unfamiliar, uncertain, has any amount of risk to it. It's scanning it, and as soon as it senses a potential threat, and notice the word potential, because it doesn't have to be real. It's something that might be, and that could be a bear in the woods that you've run into, or it's some new software rollout that's going to affect you. It's going to sound the alarm, and it's going to trigger what I'm sure you've heard of is that fight, flight, or freeze response. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of our lizard brain. And here's where the prefrontal cortex comes in. I wouldn't say it's the sister to, but they work very hand in hand. When the amygdala is active, the prefrontal cortex, if you point to the middle of your forehead, that's kind of where it's at. That part of the brain is where we rely on for problem solving and logic and emotional regulation. And this is where you teach your kids right from wrong. That it's the prefrontal cortex that knows right from wrong. But when the amygdala is active, the prefrontal cortex starts to go offline. It doesn't go away per se, but it's a lot harder to access. And that's on purpose, because if you met that bear in the woods, you would not want your prefrontal cortex to say, oh my gosh, it's such a cute bear, I don't want to hurt the bear. You want your amygdala and all of the other neurological sensors to override that cute bear so that you can survive. So that's why even small changes inside of an organization or in your life in general, they can leave people feeling really overwhelmed or really reactive. I don't know if you've ever said something intended very innocently to somebody, and then all of a sudden they react, they go off the rails, and you're like, what the heck was that? What did I say? Maybe it's the opposite. I'm sure you can think, I can anyway, I'm sure you can think of times where maybe somebody else said something to you, a spouse or a kid or something like that, and you totally overreact. What's happening there is that the thinking brain has just taken a backseat to your survival brain. So the amygdala says threat, prefrontal cortex kind of turns off there, and you don't have the logic to help you regulate your emotions. So this is why in moments of high stress, people can make impulsive decisions. They shut down emotionally, or sometimes they just stop participating. They shut down because the part of the brain that normally helps them pause and choose wisely isn't leading anymore. It's offline. And that is not a character flaw. That's how the brain is designed. It also helps explain why two people might respond totally different to the exact same change. Someone who's experienced maybe some unpredictable or painful change in the past may have a much more sensitive alarm system, the amygdala system. Their amygdala fires fast and it fires loud. It sends out that warning signal. But another person might feel more in control, or they see the situation as an opportunity because of their past experiences. So their alarm doesn't even go off. Or maybe another person, it goes off, but just a little bit, enough that the prefrontal cortex is still there to talk them down from the ledge. So that's kind of what's going on neurologically. And so what we're really trying to do as leaders is help create the kind of environment where the amygdala doesn't overreact. And when it does, if it does, help the prefrontal cortex stay in the game. That means providing context or reducing ambiguity, or maybe offering some small choices and connecting the change to something that's meaningful to that person. It also means sometimes slowing down enough to create psychological safety so that the brain doesn't default to that defense mode.
Well, I know for myself, I've definitely gone off the rails at times, and I've been withdrawn at times, and I'm happy to hear It's not so much a character flaw, but maybe just the way my brain has been mapped based off of my personal individual experiences. How do individual experiences or cultural upbringing and even past traumas like just shape how people respond at work?
Yeah, what's happening is they shape how people, I'm doing air quotes here, perceive or interpret what's happening around them. It's all about perception and interpretation. The brain doesn't show up to work in a vacuum. It brings years of pattern recognition and survival strategies and learned assumptions. For instance, if somebody grew up in an environment where questioning authority was risky, let's say, they might stay silent even when they have something really valuable to add, because they're not supposed to do that. If they've experienced instability or maybe betrayal, even a minor shift at work might feel like a threat to them. I grew up in a big family. It's relative, right? But I had 7 siblings. I was number 7, by the way, in that lineup. And I learned pretty early that if I wanted to be heard, I had to speak up. And so I became kind of a chatty Cathy when I was a kid. That sometimes today can come across as being pushy in conversations, but in the environment that I was in, it was survival for me. It should be a reminder for us that behaviors we bring into the workplace, they often started as either a strategy or some defense mechanism that made sense in somewhere else, in some other time period or in some other environment. It's important to remember these are not character flaws, they're adaptive responses. The brain reads situations through the lens of our past experiences, beliefs and behaviors and values. And when something feels familiar, even if it isn't logical, it reacts kind of like PTSD, right? I don't know if you know anybody, but I know a couple of people that have PTSD from years ago, and they have what seems like to the rest of us an illogical response to something, but to them it's very logical. So again, that's why 2 people can hear the same feedback or face the same change and respond completely different. And this is where leadership grounded in empathy really matters. We don't need to know everybody's backstory. So it's not about walking up to somebody and tell me, what happened in your childhood that was so bad. But we do need to lead in ways that account for the fact that people come in with different wiring. And if we want people to do their best thinking, which we do, right, we have to create the kind of environment where that wiring doesn't get in the way.
Yeah, I've probably met some people that have PTSD in regards to taking on new initiatives or new programs at work, and that those haven't been as successful. And so there's been some PTSD with just going through change at work. So some application for the improvement nerds out there, for those who are in Lean and Six Sigma or continuous improvement, why should we be mindful of the neuroscience that's behind change?
The reason we should care is because logic doesn't implement change. People do. It would be great if we could just use logic to change things, but that doesn't work, right? It's all about the people. And people don't respond to value stream maps or control charts. We would love them to, but that's just not how it works. They respond to clarity and safety and purpose behind the changes we're asking them to do. And we can have the best process in the world, but if the way we roll it out creates any type of fear or confusion, the brain is going to push back and the improvement's going to stall. I've seen it happen year after year for many, many, many years, even though I might not have understood it in the old days, right? Neuroscience gives us that why behind the resistance. We've all seen it, but couldn't always explain it. So it helps us understand what motivates people to engage or withdraw, and how stress or ambiguity or poor communication, any of those things can derail even the best designed systems. It also shows us how to do better by building environments that reduce threats and increase rewards. And, in a nutshell, neuroscience just helps continuous improvement actually stick. It turns tools into behaviors, and behaviors then turn into the culture. And that's why it matters to us geeky continuous improvement folks. I remember working with a healthcare team that was rolling out a major process redesign to reduce patient wait times, which is important, right? They're our customers. The tools that we were using, lean and, all that good stuff, the tools were solid. We had great data, we had strong metrics, all of those things. And so I would go in and I would work with the team and we'd do some training or whatnot. And then I'd give them some homework or I'd, tell them to practice the new routine. And I'd come back and everything had stalled. The team members, they weren't necessarily pushing back outwardly, but they just weren't adopting anything either. It was like you felt like you had to, beat them over the head with a stick to get them to do anything. And that whole thing was causing morale dips and the leaders were getting frustrated and such. And so instead of pushing harder, I slowed them down. I said, let's stop for a second. Let's do some roundtable discussions. Let's not talk about the tools, but let's talk about how people are feeling about what we're obviously being perceived as pushing on them. And that's when it came out. People in these discussions, they finally felt safe enough to tell us that they were really worried that not only was the new process potentially going to lead to job cuts, but it could also lead to patient complaints. And if you've worked in healthcare, there's not a healthcare worker that I've ever worked with that has not had patients at the forefront of anything they think. And so anyway, these things were going through their mind, but nobody said anything until we invited them to talk about it. So their amygdalas inside of their brains were screaming at them, even though the metrics and all the good reasons why we should do it were saying that it made sense. And once we were able to name that and the leadership team was able to step up, they didn't just clarify the what and the how, but the why. And not only the why, but what's not changing, which is just as important to describe as what is changing. And so they did things like weekly huddles and small wins and made sure they had lots of space for feedback and those kind of things. That's the power of leading with the brain in mind, is you're looking at that first, and then the tactical stuff tends to make more sense.
Yeah, I really appreciate in your example there, slowing down, explaining the why to help the brain absorb what's on the horizon. Are there any other practical insights, tips, tricks, or techniques to align improvement work with how the brain is actually working in the people's heads? Or
Yeah, I always say start with clarity. The brain hates ambiguity. Remember, it's a prediction machine, right? So when we kick off improvement work, we need to be crystal clear about the purpose and the roles and all of the expectations that go along with it. And I think as process improvement practitioners, I think we forget to do that oftentimes. We know how these tools and techniques and methods can make things better, but if we don't explain it to everybody else, then it's going to cause some big issues. So clarity makes a huge difference. Even small things like defining what done looks like, I think is so powerful, or explaining why something matters. All of those things are going to help the brain relax a little bit and be able to focus. The next thing that I would say is build some rhythm into the process. So having consistent check-ins and tiered meetings, regular visual updates, those kind of things can keep people's brains out of that threat mode. That rhythm is going to give teams a sense of control and progress, which it boosts engagement. It helps them feel like they have some control on things. And then, of course, please don't forget to celebrate wins, even small little things that are going well. Celebrate them. When we acknowledge progress, the brain releases a chemical called dopamine. I'm sure you've heard of it. And when we get this hit of dopamine, it reinforces the behavior we want more of. And so a simple "you made a real impact with this" can go a long way towards sustaining motivation. Improvement isn't just about systems. It's about people. If you keep that first and foremost, you're going to have great success. And when we design our systems with the brain in mind, which is about the people, they're going to work better for everyone.
yeah, no doubt. As we think about the brain and change, there's models out there like SCARF, and you have a model, brain model, that builds on or complements SCARF. Can you introduce us to what SCARF is and then tell us about the brain model?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I have to say, I love David Rock's SCARF model. And for those of you listening to this, Google it, SCARF model. It's an acronym, just like my brain model is. It was really the first framework that I came across that made the neuroscience of work feel not only accessible, but immediately relatable for me. It gave me a language to things we see in organizations, but I didn't always know how to explain it, like why people freeze up in uncertainty or disengage. So the SCARF model does a great job of identifying the social triggers that activate threats or rewards, things in his model, status, uncertainty, and fairness. The SCARF model helps you understand how people react emotionally and socially at work. The brain model is a little bit different. It builds on that foundation, but it takes it a step further by turning those insights into actionable design. I wanted something that leaders and improvement professionals could use to shape their systems, not just understand the reactions, which again, the SCARF model is great at, but be able to react to them and to design. The brain model is belonging, resilience, autonomy, insight, and nurturing. And these aren't just human needs. They're categories that we can build into our communication rhythms. We can build them into our feedback loops and into our accountability structures. So where SCARF helps you understand the reaction, brain is intended to help you change the environment. It's a way to bring neuroscience into the everyday mechanics of leadership and operational excellence. It's not just theory, but it's practice.
I like that. And I hope leaders will become familiar with this brain model and utilize the brain model to create a culture that is aligned with how our brains are wired. Can you give us just some insight into how leaders can do that?
Yeah. So the leadership role is a huge one. Culture isn't supposed to just happen, although for many organizations it does. It's something that we're supposed to design, and leaders shape it every day, whether they mean to or not. What they prioritize, what they reward, what they reinforce, or even what they ignore becomes the blueprint that the brain learns to follow. Again, the brain is a pattern recognizing machine. So when it sees things over and over again, it puts them into our memory. The brain is always scanning for patterns, and that could include who gets praised. It could include what gets punished, what's safe to say out loud, like my earlier story, right? So when leaders create consistency, or they offer clarity, or they model trust, the brain starts to relax. That's when people think more clearly, they take more ownership, they engage at really a higher level in things. On the flip side, if there's misalignment, you say one thing but do another, the brain's going to pick up on that too, and it's going to flag it as a threat. So leadership plays a huge role in all this. It's not about charisma either. I know lots of charismatic leaders, and they're great in their own right, but it's not about that as it relates to brain science. It's about consistency. If we want cultures that bring out the best in people, we have to lead in ways that align with how the brain actually works.
Insightful. Tell me a little bit about what leaders can do to reduce threat responses and increase the sense of reward.
Well, like we talked about earlier, uncertainty is stressful in so many ways. So clarity is going to be one of the simplest ways to reduce threat. That doesn't mean having every answer to every question, but it does mean being upfront about what's known. Also talking about what's still unfolding, because if the brain doesn't know something, it will make up stories. And the stories that it will tell itself are typically not the warm, fuzzy, rosy kind of stories. It will go in the opposite way because, again, it's the amygdala, right? It sounded the alarm and it thinks something's wrong. So it's going to make stories up. So if you tell people what you know and what's still unfolding that you don't know, and then maybe a little bit about how decisions are being made on some of what's being unfolded, that will help reduce the threat response in the brain. From there, going back to the consistency side with leadership, right? Predictable communication, regular check-ins, steady follow-through. Those are all going to keep the brain feeling nice and safe. It's going to lower all that, the noise, the outside noise that keeps the prefrontal cortex online, which is where focused logic and collaboration live. And then leaning into that reward. That means recognizing effort, offering autonomy where possible, letting people see things for themselves, reinforcing progress that's being made. And none of this has to be flashy, by the way. You don't need big reward systems that every time somebody does something great that you have to give them some reward bucks or some big gift card or something like that. Just a thanks for how you handled that, or, well-timed, hey man, you've got this. That all of those things can activate the brain's reward system and help people stay engaged. And finally, for leaders, your presence, I can't even tell you how much this matters. Your presence matters. When leaders model calm, when they create space for others to stay grounded, the team's going to see you navigating that stress and steadiness, and their brain is going to take a cue from that. And they're going to know, hey, we're safe. We can do the same thing. And that changes everything.
Yeah, modeling that is amazing. And we're talking about increasing that sense of reward within the brain. I guess on the flip side of that, what leadership habits may commonly trigger unintended reactions in employees?
That's such a good question. One of the biggest is inconsistency in leaders. When a leader says one thing, but then they do another, even if it's unintentional, by the way, it's going to create a disconnect that the brain is going to flag as a threat. It's like your spidey senses go up, right? They can happen when values are posted. But I mean, every company I've ever gone into has some sort of values on their pasted on a wall, or their mission statement or whatever. But if they have them posted, but they're not actually living those values, maybe when recognition is not given very often, pretty sporadic, or when priorities shift and the leaders don't explain why those priorities shift, those can all be triggers. It's not the change that causes the reaction, it's the unpredictability, because the brain likes predictability. Another common one, micromanagement. We haven't talked about that yet. Micromanagement disguised as support. Leaders may think that they're being helpful, but when an employee feels like they don't have ownership or they don't have your trust, it's going to activate a stress response, even if no one says it to you out loud. I once worked with a leader who consistently told his team, hey, give me your ideas. I want your ideas. There's no bad ideas. You've heard it before. But then he would shut down every single idea that anybody would give him that wasn't his. Talk about kind of an inconsistency there. It didn't take long before people stopped speaking up. They're like, why bother? Not because they didn't care, but because their brain just learned it's not safe, it's not worth my time, all of those things. So even our systems can send mixed signals. So if we preach, for instance, continuous improvement, but then we punish failure, people are going to stop experimenting. And that's what continuous improvement is all about, right? Just try something, see if it gets you better. And if not, start over. If we talk about collaboration, but then we reward only individual performance, the culture's going to feel unsafe for that. And the brain's going to pick up on those gaps. Most of the time, I've found it's never bad intent by any leader. It's just a misalignment or an unawareness. But even small disconnects between what we say and what we reinforce, they really can ripple through a team fast.
Indeed. I'm just learning so much on this podcast here for myself. And I've been on the receiving end of good coaching and maybe poor coaching. As you're talking through this stuff, I'm just thinking about it. How has your understanding of neuroscience changed maybe your approach to coaching leaders?
I think the biggest thing it's done is it's made me much slower to judge and much quicker to ask why. Before I understood how the brain processes change and how it perceives threats, I saw resistance as just that stubbornness or the lack of buy-in. Somebody's just being difficult, right? Now I see it as self-protection. So I know that if somebody is coming across as difficult, something else is going on. And that shift in mindset changed everything for me, from how I give feedback to how I help leaders design systems. It also helped me focus less on fixing people and more on fixing environments. I think as process improvement folks, we always say, focus on the process, not the people. I don't know that we always do a good job on that, but now that I understand the neuroscience behind it, I can't fix people. There is absolutely no way in the world I am going to change your past experiences or the beliefs that you grew up with or your values. But you can fix environments, and leaders are always asking me, how do I get my team to be more engaged? If you Google, there's probably a million books just on that subject, right? And my response is usually, let's look at the system first. Is there a clarity in the system? Is there safety in the system? Are there built-in moments of progress or recognition? And when I start to uncover those gaps, then I'm not only helping them see what is missing, but we actually get to something that provides that safety. And understanding the brain, it didn't just give me a better coaching tool, it gave me more compassion and empathy. And it really helped me teach leaders that engagement isn't about charisma, it's about design, and anybody can learn it.
That's encouraging. I think I'll just take it a step further, just to dig deeper. Are there any stories where neuroscience insights helped resolve or reframe a tough situation that you could share with us?
Yeah. Actually, there are two moments that stand out because they really showed me the value of practicing what I teach. I wasn't always good at it. I don't know that I'm an expert at it, but there was a time where I was just starting out. And interestingly, both of these stories, they both involve the same CEO, somebody that I worked with very closely, who tended to be kind of reactionary. No, he wasn't kind of reactionary. He was very reactionary in most situations. So the first one I'll tell you about, we were in a leadership meeting and he unexpectedly challenged something that I'd proposed. It was one of those situations where, hey, tell me what y'all think. And then, I threw something out and I got what I thought was just the weirdest response. His response, first of all, it was fairly rude. His tone was really sharp. And it was very clearly directed at me, even though other people had come up with other ideas. There was something going on there. And, I suddenly felt like a lightning rod for tension that I didn't even know was there. Completely unexpected. And at that point, somebody kind of barks at you or whatever. Everybody just kind of looks down and pretends it's not happening, hoping that they're not going to be the next lightning rod, right? And so I could feel my body tense up, that hot spiraling feeling you get when your brain starts moving into that fight, flight, or freeze phase. And I knew I was heading into a threat response. Now, I wouldn't have known that had I not known about neuroscience and how it all affects, because in the past, I probably would have shut completely down and just, whatever, or I would have gone on the defensive, probably more of that. But instead, I paused and in my head, I asked myself, okay, what part of the brain model feels missing for me right now? And I took my piece of paper and I scribbled just one word in the margin of my notes. And I remember I just wrote down belonging. I realized that I suddenly felt like I didn't belong in the room anymore. Like I was on the outside, like I didn't belong at the table and I didn't have good ideas. Everybody else's was great and mine wasn't. I don't know if that makes sense or if you've ever felt that way, but just writing that down, which is a tool I use, just writing that down helped me interrupt the reaction that was going on in my brain. It gave me just enough space to breathe and to remind myself that this isn't personal. This is wiring going on. Something is going on with him. And it could have been just a bad day or a million other things going on. But that one small action, just naming it, helped me stay in the conversation and respond with clarity instead of defensiveness or retreating to my shell. And honestly, it kept me from reacting in a way that I probably would have regretted a little bit later, like I've done so many times in the past. The second story, this was not long after that, maybe 3 or 4 months, something like that. I had another moment, same CEO. This time we were in an executive meeting and we were reviewing some curriculum for some leadership classes that we were revising. And I was over curriculum development. And so my job was to pull up this curriculum and then go through it and then decide, what do we want to get rid of? What do we want to just change? What do we want to add? All that stuff. And so as a group, we were all talking about it, and I suggested a small change to one of the sections that I wasn't really familiar with. This part of it had been in the curriculum for a while, and I saw it immediately. His voice started to raise as he was making his opinion known. His expression shifted. His lips started to quiver. This was a little telltale with him that we knew when he was getting angry or upset, because his little lip would quiver a little bit there. And it was clear to me and everybody around us that his reaction was very much aimed at me. After all, it was my suggestion, right? But this time, instead of tightening up or trying to push through it, I stayed calm, and I said to him something to the effect of, it really seems like this is hitting a nerve for you. Would you mind sharing what's behind that? And that one sentence, and I promise you, I'd never said anything like that before. That one sentence completely shifted the dynamic of the room and of him. He exhaled. And he told me that he had personally written that section of the curriculum a year or so ago, and it was tied very deeply to a personal story from his own leadership journey. And as soon as we all understood that, first of all, everything made sense. Feeling safe at this point now, because we kind of diffused the room, he actually then was able to get out of the emotion of it and admit that, yeah, the change that you just recommended, I was stuck with it because I'm emotionally tied to it, but the change it makes sense. So there was that part. But what was really cool about this story is that after that meeting, I received some feedback from one of the executives, the CFO of our organization, who just an amazing man. And I had asked him previously, because I wasn't always great at my responses, right? I had asked him, give me feedback. When you see me overreacting to something or not handling something, can you just, you don't have to tell me right at that second, but later pull me aside and let me know, because if I don't know, then I can't fix it. And so anyway, he pulled me aside afterwards and he said, wow, you did a great job with that. You handled it exactly how you should have. It diffused the situation. And guess what that feedback did? It connected right to my reward system, and it helped so that I had clarity around the behavior that I should repeat in the future. And so I was able to mimic that in other conversations with other people. And in both of these moments, neuroscience gave me a framework. It gave me a framework to understand what was happening in the room and inside of me. One helped me stay grounded. The other helped someone else feel safe enough to be honest. And both led to better outcomes than if I just reacted out of my old habits.
Just as a final thought, and as we wrap up, what's one big takeaway that you hope improvement professionals walk away from this conversation with?
I guess if I had to pick one thing, I hope they walk away seeing neuroscience not as this side note to improvement, but as a missing link in how we actually sustain excellence. It's very synergistic. We've spent years teaching tools. We've spent years building systems, rolling out change. But if these systems aren't designed to work with the brain, they will not last. And this isn't about turning everyone into neuroscientists. The only thing that it's about is understanding that the brain drives behaviors, the behaviors drive culture, and the culture is what's going to sustain performance and excellence. So if we want organizational excellence that actually sticks, we need leadership practices, we need systems, and we need environments that align with how people learn, adapt, and stay engaged. Neuroscience, it helps us design for clarity and motivation and helps us build trust. It's not just about compliance. It gives us an edge. Most improvement efforts miss, I think, or at least mine always have. And when we apply it intentionally, it strengthens everything else we're already doing, from lean to leadership to learning, whatever it is you're doing. That's how we move from short-term change to long-term excellence.
Well, it's good to know that we don't have to be brain scientists to implement this stuff. I hear that there's a good book that's coming out.
Oh, you're so kind.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it is finished. It's at the editors. I've got a book coming out. It's called Wired for Excellence, Harnessing Brain Science for Organizational Success. And, it's just sucking all this stuff out of my little brain and throwing it out there so that I can share a little bit more about how we use brain science to achieve the results that we're looking for in organizations.
I'll be looking forward to my autographed copy in the mail. Can't wait for that to come out. So that's awesome. How can we find you or get in touch with you?
I am on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I often go by Chris instead of Christiana. So you may see me there if you Google me. You can reach me on my email, which is chayes, so CHAYES at getimpacts.com, GETIMPACTS.com. Either of those work. And on my website, impactperformancesolutions.com, you can reach me through that as well.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for nerding out with us today. It has been very informative and insightful.
Oh, so fun. And thank you so much for inviting me. I will geek out with you anytime.
And that's a wrap, Improvement Nerds. Huge thanks to Chris Hayes for sharing her powerful insights and helping us connect the dots between neuroscience and sustainable change. From the amygdala's panic button to the power of dopamine, from emotional triggers to psychological safety, Chris showed us how understanding the brain is essential for leading lasting improvement. We explored her brain model, why resistance isn't defiance, and how leaders can move from pressure to permission and from pushing change to creating conditions for it to thrive. This episode and all episodes of the Improvement Nerds podcast are brought to you by the Green Dot Group, your partners in continuous improvement. If you're ready to build smarter systems and stronger cultures, check us out at thegreendotgroup.com. We'd love to connect and support your journey. If this conversation sparked new ideas or challenged your thinking, go ahead, like, subscribe, and share with a fellow nerd. And leave us a review while you're at it. And if you have a guest or topic in mind, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and always leave your processes better than you found them.